Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Stimson Center. I'm Link Bloomfield, and welcome to our new edition of the Chairman's Forum.
Are you guys mic'd up?
Can you not hear us? All right, maybe you can elevate the volume just a bit. Today, I'm extremely pleased and honored to introduce as my special guest General Schwartz, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. He's well known in Washington to all of you, but I will just simply point out that General Schwartz has had a phenomenal career leading up to what I would describe as a predictable selection to lead the U.S. Air Force and more than 600,000.
Not everybody would agree.
Airmen and airwomen. I'm trying to relieve you of what the way Washington handles its leaders these days. But General Schwartz is a command pilot with well over 4,000 hours of experience. He knows a great deal about airlift. He is a Special Forces warrior, has had several important assignments, including in operational venues overseas. He has had very important policy assignments. It was my great privilege to get to know him when he was the, I guess, Director of Operations on the Joint Staff. He became the Director Joint Staff. He was the Deputy Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command and, of course, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. So welcome, General Schwartz. Thanks so much, Chief, for being here.
Thank you.
It's an honor. So I'm going to start with just a broad gauge question. We're going to get into a lot of the big changes that are evident with the budget crisis, with the wars winding down, with a lot of issues about the future of the force. Chief, if you were talking to, and maybe you were even today, but if you were talking to some young people, men and women, who were considering a career in the United States Air Force, they may remember the iconic images of test pilots and astronauts and Top Gun and these kinds of things. And they might wonder, what is a career in the Air Force going to look like starting now, looking forward? I just want to get, what's your vision and what do you tell young people who are considering a career in the United States Air Force?
Well, a couple things. I think, first of all, that fundamentally we, like the other services, are merit-based organizations. And so youngsters who have aspirations can find a place to apply their talent, serve the nation, and find a rewarding career if they choose to do so. Clearly, there are 4 areas at least which I think will be enduring no matter what the budget situation looks like and how big or small we may end up. First would be control of air and space. It's a capability, it's a mission we perform on behalf of the joint team, essentially to assure our teammates that they can operate on the surface, maritime or land, without threat of attack from above. Second is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That clearly is going to be a continuing and increasing demand signal, and we're going to be performing that both in exo-atmospheric and air breathing. Third is global mobility, getting shooters to the fight, and air refueling, range extension for shorter leg aircraft. And the final one is global strike. It's clearly the nation requires an ability to reach out and touch potential adversaries, and at least in significant measure, that's a capacity the Air Force has always and will always provide, I think. So these are the enduring qualities of our Air Force, and that's what youngsters, again, with aspirations of service, have to look forward to.
By the way, I overlooked your combatant command assignment as Commander of U.S. Transportation Command, and my oversight. So you've already given us these 4 priorities in a certain order. The world has evolved in a way that we're not always facing with the conventional kind of threats that were easier to see and track from space or from the air. a lot of non-state actors, a lot of non-traditional missions. How does our understanding of airspace control, air power, ISR, how does that change in order to be relevant to this more globalized, asymmetric, non-conventional, dispersed, covert, in some cases, kind of a threat?
Well, I think you have to have reach. You have to have the capacity to get to those places where events are occurring that you have an interest in, and you need to have, you know, the capabilities to perform those missions. And there's some key themes, I think, that are obvious for lower end kinds of things as well as more traditional warfighting, and that simply is precision is a key aspect of our capability that is equally relevant in a counterinsurgency environment as it is in a larger, more general purpose kind of scenario. Having the capacity to operate at high tempo is vitally important, and that is something that we are particularly good at. We, I mean the American Armed Forces. Partners typically are good at a few things. We are good at a broader array of things, but importantly, we can sustain that activity for an extended period of time, which gives us depth that few others share. And I think, again, that the synthesis of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, of both kinetic and non-kinetic kinds of activities, and the command and control that goes around all that are applicable across the spectrum of potential missions and will remain relevant, you know, going forward.
When we think of the last decade, people in the political and policy sphere tend to say, well, it's been a hard 10 years. We've had a high ops tempo. We've exerted ourselves. We've spent a lot. We've lost a lot. But how much better is the United States Air Force today as a consequence of all that activity than we were a decade ago?
I would say that we, from an operations concept point of view, from a tactics, techniques, and procedures point of view, clearly we're better. We wouldn't be a learning institution if we weren't. But I also think we should not ignore the fact that we, and to some extent I think it's true for the other services, are worn by 10 years of war. And this is both in terms of human and physical assets. And so, yes, we are better, an example, that we only had a handful of remotely piloted aircraft in 2001. And we are using RPAs now in a way that no one contemplated, and having that relevant to the troop, the Marine, the Airman, or the Navy SEAL, as the case may be, on the ground in real time. So we certainly have progressed substantially over the last 10 years, but a concern remains that our assets and our people have sacrificed, and they've been working hard for an extended period, and this is something we need to keep in mind about how we go about resetting this force in a way that postures us well for the future.
If I may ask you kind of a short-term question to follow that up. I don't do current affairs like a journalist, but on Iran, I believe you were quoted at one point recently as saying that military options are ready should the president require. And I guess my question is, looking at the Iraq and Afghanistan interventions, there was certainly a combat mission which was executed in fairly short order. And what followed in each case was a rather extended period of post-conflict involvement, call it what you will. And so the question then is, if it's a theoretical question. I grant you it doesn't require, you may not want to talk about theoretical issues, but if there were an intervention or a military action with Iran that didn't end in a pristine, neat moment at the end of the mission, but instead had sort of unpredictable consequences that it required similar amounts of national effort to manage the post-conflict situation, is the Air Force also prepared to do that?
We would certainly be prepared to support the mission, whatever context it was assigned. But I think your point is a good one, in that in addition to the more employment-related lessons of the last 10 years, I think another lesson that certainly is relevant at the policy level is to better scope the consequences of action, or inaction for that matter, and to try to anticipate better what might unfold and to properly plan and to include those potential contingencies in the decision-making process. You know, arguably, we did not anticipate well enough, just to take the Operation Iraqi Freedom scenario, well enough what sequels that mission might incorporate, and we've adapted, we accommodated, and so on. But I think clearly, from a planner's point of view, a strategic planner's point of view, that's an important lesson. So how does this end, to use Dave Petraeus's famous quote? You know, what are the potential issues that might intervene, and you know, our brightest people need to be able to address those kinds of questions, as well as, you know, the more comfortable questions of, you know, how do I gain access here, how do I defeat that threat there, and so on.
Let me ask a long-term question about the threat, the evolution of the threat. And this comes from a civilian who's been privileged to observe the military at close range for a long time. My observation, I may be wrong, is that there has been a mindset, in the best sense of the word, that says technology and developing our capabilities will give us the edge, and that therefore we can always see further, shoot further, be more accurate, and that therefore we kept advancing the baseline of our capabilities to a point of really global strike and high precision and standoff and a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. My question, sir, is what about the rest of the world? We've created technologies, people see what we have, they try to build it, they obtain the technology from us or others, and so what is the sort of rest of world baseline that might be coming at our forces on the future battlefield? And do we need to start focusing more on force protection against, I mean, and even a 1980 level enemy capability is formidable compared to whatever we faced in the past. So if I could ask you to sort of wear your Joint Chiefs hat, and from a force protection standpoint, am I making this up, or is this starting to be a real concern as we look over our shoulder?
Well, it's not starting to be. It is a concern. I mean, clearly the whole notion of anti-access and area denial is real, and you have a situation where the technology has begun to proliferate, ballistic missiles, integrated air defenses, long-range sensors, and so on, that have begun to proliferate, that make it more difficult for those of us who have enjoyed the capacity to project military power with relative ease. And that ease is, that advantage, if we're not careful, can diminish. Secondly, and as you suggest, that these technologies also place areas where we have been in sanctuary at risk, and so the need to pursue countermeasures clearly is important. The case in point would be ballistic missile defense, A case in point would be, for us, airbase hardening. For the Navy, there are sort of counterparts related both to their shore bases and their ships at sea. So yes, there's a need here both to respond from an employment point of view with the reality that the environment out there is more challenging. It is more competitive. It is not benign. And secondly, that we have taken for granted our areas of sanctuary, which are less, that's less the case and will be so going forward, and have to adjust accordingly.
I want to ask you about sort of the global force posture, the footprint issue, because in recent years there's been a tendency to say, in other services as well, we've got forces deployed around the world. We should be, either for budgetary or for other reasons, pull more of them back to the United States. But at the same time, the U.S. Air Force has some, I don't know if the right term is short-legged fighters, but we've got air superiority aircraft which need to be refueled if they're going to go very far. Is there any inconsistency in pulling back more forces to the United States and trying to sort of deploy from here? Would it be more optimal to position short-legged fighters around the world?
Well, there's two parts to your question. The first part, in terms of our global footprint, is that I personally don't view Fortress America as the solution set. Because if you're going to have a power projection capability, the reality is you cannot do that exclusively from the homeland. You need what we call lily pads in order to facilitate that capability. And so forward presence has quality with respect to deterrence, to relationship building, to partner improvements and so on. That's important, but it also is a strategy to attain and maintain access. Very important. I think the other aspect that you mentioned is this sort of tension between short and long legs. You need both. You know, folks that sort of absolutists on either side are, I think are not really thinking the problem through that well. We're never going to have 1,000 bombers in the United States Air Force. And the reality is that the tactical situations we're likely to encounter, you have to consider the geometry, you have to consider the geography, you have to consider the target set, you have to consider the threat environment. And if you're going to maintain 24/7 pressure on a target set, you probably can't do that with 150 bombers over an extended period. And so you need assets that enable you to produce high sortie counts and continuous coverage and so on and so forth. Certainly remotely piloted aircraft are helpful in this regard, but they are not anytime, anyplace airplanes, at least in their current configuration. So the bottom line is forward presence is an important part of our strategy, and while it isn't terribly popular, it is needed. And secondly, that will always require a blend between long and short-legged assets because of the way we operate, and again the contest we're likely to have to play in.
In the past, there have been policy debates about American unilateralism. They tapered off, I think, a little bit in the last 5 years under the previous administration, second term, and under Mr. President Obama's administration, where the doctrinal documents from the national security strategy through defense and military strategies reflected a strong commitment to coalition and alliance structures. My question concerns export controls, arms transfers. The Air Force is a very high technology organization. And my question is, how should Washington, as they go through an export control review, should there be a very sharp differential between countries that actually become part of our operational coalitions and alliance operations, where interoperability is essential to be part of the battle space, versus people who, countries which do not send forces and do not apparently are not seen as being future forces in a lethal battle space? Should it be tied to operational requirements more than it has in the past, or and as a general proposition, do you foresee, with U.S. defense budgets declining, more of a releasability push to take a little bit higher baseline of technology and to keep our defense industry to compensate for lost Pentagon procurement? What's your view on that?
I think it's a couple things. First of all, clearly supporting viable partners is a major part of this approach. And the more viable the partner, the better. Absolutely true. To exclude others, however, I think is not wise. And my point here is this, that typically if you are working equipage issues with a partner Air Force, Navy, or Army, what have you, these turn out to be multi-decade arrangements. And those arrangements have strategic value, certainly at a military-to-military level, government-to-government, and so on. And to exclude the possibility of attaining these long-term relationships without very good reason, I think, is pretty short-sighted. With respect to the process, it's frustrating, it's slow, it is not really arranged in a way for the way governments now and potential customers make decisions. And there are intervening issues that sometimes are more emotional than they are rational. So, the effort